Let's go ahead and move forward with our exciting Q&A session moderated by Maria Izzy and Marie Enzi. So take it away.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Davida. Yeah, so my name is Maria Izzy. I'm currently a senior at Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology in Northern Virginia. I also help lead Girls Computing League, which is a national student-run nonprofit that brings emerging tech to low-income and minority students across the nation. And so through the organization, I've worked with a lot of Title I schools and low-income housing in DC for over 4 years, which is kind of where my interest in this panel began. And here's my co-host, Marie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marie Enzi. I'm a student in mechanical engineering and astronomy at George Mason University, and I will be representing the GMU chapter of the Society of Women Engineers. Basically, what we do there is to just give women engineers a unique place and a voice within our community to just express themselves, really. And I'm super grateful today to be learning from the panelists. Today would actually have Rachel Lowe. Please correct me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong in any way. Could you please introduce yourself with your pronouns as well?
Hi, yeah, my name is Rachel Law, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. Should I talk a little bit about what I've done or what I do?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. So I am a current PhD student at Duke University here in North Carolina, and I graduated in 2020 from Duke, majoring in civil and environmental engineering with a focus on global engineering. And my research interests include geophysical disaster, but I also look at just disaster response in general is kind of my area. And so I work specifically with earthquakes and landslides. I've worked here at Duke and abroad on kind of those main areas. But I do a bunch of other random things, but it's fun. I have a good time.
Great, thanks so much. Next we have Dr. Acosta. Could you quickly introduce yourself and give us your pronouns as well?
Sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Carlos Acosta. You can also call me Charlie. My pronouns are he, she, and they. I am a physician by training and current graduate student at Johns Hopkins University, where I'm majoring in public health and business administration. I am very interested in kind of like basically how health systems are in accordance with human rights and like the intersection between healthcare and policy. And yeah, I'm very excited to be here and get to know all of you. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being with us. And next we would have Sydney. Sydney, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Sydney Hollabo. I am from the Chicago area. So hello to everyone on the East and West Coast. I'm actually a senior in high school at Deerfield High School in the northern suburbs of the Chicagoland area. And I actually started Balance Boxes. It's a youth-led nonprofit that has actually gone all over the globe. So basically we provide boxes filled with games, educational toys, books, activities, free tutoring services, and meals for all the kids. And that's kind of what I've done during this whole pandemic, because I realized that, you know, education is a privilege and it should be a right to everyone. So I've been working on that with my friend over the past 7 months, and that's how I've spent my time at home.
Great, thanks so much. And could you give us your pronouns really quick?
Yeah, she, her, hers.
Great. And finally, we have Miss Callan.
Hi, I'm Melanie Callan, and she, her, hers is fine with me. I am here in San Francisco, and I work as a clinician and faculty member at UCSF and our county public hospital, San Francisco General Hospital, in the area of pediatrics, specifically with children and families that are coping with a various range of developmental and behavioral disabilities. And I work pretty cross-sector in terms of medicine, education, and psychology. So a lot of involvement in the schools and also in our community, in particular our immigrant community. Thank you.
Thanks to you. All right, so we can get started with the questions now. And the first question would be addressed to Sydney. And so was there a specific moment or story that influenced your career path or work?
Yeah, so I come from like a very privileged area and I live again like right outside Chicago, and I know people who don't like necessarily have the materials I have to learn, and I value education a lot. And I actually had a friend, her name is Kyla, and she started this organization called GirlCon, getting girls interested in STEM, and I was really like, this is a great idea, and I became part of the team. And as I said, I decided to start balance boxes because of the pandemic. And I felt like this was a time when people needed help. People were laid off from work, people couldn't go to school. And I know I had to transition from e learning. And then we had the summer. So I just felt that during that period of time, the 3 months it turned out to be, because they just canceled school for me. Um, I felt that, kids have to like grow during this time, because again, e-learning is a hindrance to everyone's learning. And so I guess like it was the pandemic that really like made me think like this is what I have to do. And again, like I am a high school student, so I don't necessarily like have a career path, but I do want to go into engineering. So for the boxes, they all have themes. I make STEM boxes, and I hope girls pick them because it's really for anyone, but we do need more women in STEM. And that's kind of my like little way of trying to get other children at a young age to find out what their passion is. And again, this started during the pandemic, if it was like a specific time.
Anyone can take the question next if anyone else has one.
I can go. Yeah, no problem. So I guess something that influenced my career path. I think my career has like largely been influenced by my personal experiences, but I guess also kind of like what I find in my community that we lack. So I grew up in Latin America, in Colombia specifically, and I've always felt that as a member of the LGBT community, there were still gaps like in the medical health system and medical education specifically that let's say progressed to systemic problems within my healthcare system. And when I was in high school, I decided kind of like to start thinking on ways to address that. At the moment, I thought that medicine like was let's say the main entry to do so, but right now like I'm seeing kind of like definitely like more opportunities within other areas, and very interested kind of like in looking at that. So one of the areas I'm very interested right now, for example, is technology, right? And all these gender marks and gender representation within diversity, and within like new apps with healthcare. Telehealth and digital health is something that is widely or fastly spreading out and growing each year. With COVID-19, we have seen a boost in all these kinds of initiatives. So yeah, like kind of like that background, that personal background, like definitely motivates me to find those things that will make these new efforts like more inclusive and more relevant for people like me and my community.
I can take the next or an answer as well. So for me, what really influenced my career path or work was actually a writing class that I took in undergrad. I actually always been interested in medicine, and quite passionate about that. And so it was with, I was actually interested in like a trauma response in medicine, but I actually ended up taking a class that I had no idea what it was about. But I actually learned it was about garbage, which is never really like talked about very openly, and like how we deal with like waste. And so I actually fell in love with how like society looks at waste, how we understand like and value different aspects of our society, and how they are all actually quite interconnected. I actually ended up changing my major because of it, because I was really interested in how we regard the environment and our civil structures and how they reflect our values as a society. And so that's kind of what I guess led me to where I am now.
Yeah, and I'll give a brief try not to be too expansive, but I had a pretty circuitous path as well. So starting out with the initial sort of thought of going into medicine and specifically pediatrics or child psychiatry. And then in undergrad, I worked at a lab and was doing some research on treatments for children diagnosed with autism. And this was back in the 90s before it was quite pervasive. And then I became, more interested specifically in child psychology, but through my work with a number of our families that we were seeing, I was going into the schools and really seeing how different environments greatly impact outcomes. And so I wanted to kind of integrate education more into my career. And then I actually started my PhD in clinical psychology, but left the program because I realized that I didn't want to be narrowed down to specifically working on a treatment strategy for a very finite group of people. And so then I decided to get back into sort of indirectly into medicine in pediatrics, because that's where I really felt like we have the most opportunity for identification, continuity of care, engagement. And that was really a way that I can make the most impact, because I think, the way that our society is set up is very much about letters after your name and hierarchy. And, if you're a doctor, people will listen to you, whether they should or not is another story. But, I think that's something that I found it really valuable to learn from a diverse group of fields and not just within my little subsector. So that's kind of my career path.
Those are all actually really interesting responses. Our second question is, what do you see as the biggest problem within your line of work, and how do you envision this problem being solved? And also, how do you contribute to that vision, and how can we contribute to that vision? And so for this one, the first person to answer will be Ms. Callan.
Yes, I mean, it's hard to pinpoint the biggest or one problem, but to be honest, I feel that bias and discrimination and assumptions are one of the biggest factors that I see, and not just specifically in terms of race or gender, ethnicity or language background, but even disabilities and even sort of health outcomes, and looking at, where I see a pretty wide range of patients with coming in with all kinds of developmental disabilities or challenges or special medical health care needs. And I have learned that to not have expectations because outcomes can change all the time. I think one of the other really important factors is really listening to people and asking questions. I think we all make a lot of assumptions because of what we see on the surface or what we read or what we think or hear. And I think it's incredibly important to actually ask questions, because if I'm working with a family and I assume, oh, they're going to listen to me because I'm in a hospital, or, they want help, and or I don't know that what their background or history is, just because they're a new immigrant, it doesn't mean that they automatically don't know or know something about what they can access locally or what kind of cultural factors might influence them or their children. So I think asking questions is really important, because people feel that they're being heard and connected with, and then you can better start to learn and grow yourself. And not just focus on sort of what your agenda is or trying to kind of target things. So yeah, I think, again, I think this sort of theme of bias and discrimination and making assumptions is the biggest barrier for sure. And, we all can do our part to contribute to helping with that.
If I can just add to that, I think that's just so on point. Thank you so much. I definitely feel that medical culture, has a very tight characteristic of being very, how do you say it, stubborn. We are very guided through what's published in a paper, and we need to recognize that sometimes we just don't hold 100% of the truth or the information, and there's just so many things to to do. And right now, like with COVID, for example, like many people are arguing how research, like traditionally and for many years has been produced, for example, in the global north, and how that is not necessarily translated to every single situation in every country within the global south, despite the fact that like many guidelines and let's say truths within medicine like are built within those articles that are produced in the US, Europe, China, whatever. And I definitely think that, for example, in LGBTQ plus history, much of the like information and medical knowledge that we drew, it was through studies that were done with only straight sample, like population samples, or only with people with certain characteristics. And although like it took a while for us to realize and accept that maybe the type of information that we have has these gaps, and therefore we need to have an extra effort in order to understand other people. So that comes definitely by what Ms. Khan was saying in terms of like asking questions and remain open in knowing that you might not have the full information right now. That doesn't mean that you cannot get there. Of course you can, but it does take a recognition of, you know, like I think a coin of humbleness, you know, and accepting that there's knowledge out there that people can give you. Although you do have a lot and you did study a lot, etc., there's still so many things that you can learn, and that's exciting. And I think that's kind of like the beauty of all of this kind of like science work, so on and so forth.
Yeah, and I'll echo in the time being too, you know, obviously we're seeing this a lot with political outcomes and even assumptions that are being made about people's affiliations or values around voting. And so I just think it kind of crosses sectors. And yeah, I'm just grateful to be in collaboration with this team here who is all working to help reduce as much as we can discrimination and hopefully disparities.
And to piggyback on that, like again, like I feel that the biggest problem in my line of work, again, like volunteering, I would say access. And that could be like multiple ways. Like again, I focus on access to education, but also like for me, I like resonated with like the STEM community, and like I had access to clubs like Girls Coding Club, like where I felt there was a safe space for me to learn. And I feel that like again, like it's not me creating it, but like we do need to create like safe spaces for people to find out what they love, because a lot of kids go into college saying, I don't know what I want to do. And that's not wrong, but like I feel that like for me it's helpful when I'm applying to college, because I am, that I do know what I want to go into, and like at least I have like a direction. Like I'm more interested in engineering. Again, I don't know what kind of engineering, but I feel like starting at a young age, like I'm working with kids like kindergarten through 5th grade, like if I can provide them with the materials that will help them figure out what they want to do in life, like I think that's what we need to go towards. Because again, if they never like got access to books, like toys, like including STEM and all these other fields of interest, like they probably wouldn't know what they want to go into. And again, that's like a path like along the way, again, starting small when you're young, and then in high school, like figuring out like with clubs and safe spaces. And I think again, like access like throughout everyone's life is important, and like solving it, again, there's so many stages of your life that I think there are different ways to solve it. And again, like clubs, like surrounding yourself. And I love this panel because again, you can hear from so many people in their career path, and hopefully further pursue your interests.
To kind of add a little bit, so for me particularly, like what I'm interested in and working in is the intersection of disaster response with particularly vulnerable populations in disaster housing. So in particular, refugee camps and housing. And so a big issue within this line of work is that there are engineers, and then there are people who create policy, and seldom is there a intersection of engineers who have a technical understanding of risk and policymakers who know how to write or create policy that can actually be effective, given technical risk. And so an issue with that also is that there is like a very underrepresented, the people who are oftentimes being like creating policy do not represent the populations that they are creating the policy for, and the at-risk populations. And those narratives are really difficult to find. And so one thing for me that I'm trying to do is like, I don't necessarily represent the populations that I am trying to create technical policy with, but for me, like that is the only people I am listening to are the narratives and the ideas, and basically just anyone who is willing to talk and speak up about it, and is educating myself before I create or jump to conclusions or create ideas of things, and keeping an open mind. But for me also, it's versing myself in kind of the different languages, right? The language of like the policymaker and me with an engineering background, trying to find a seat at that table, and being taken like seriously by a group of policymakers is a little bit more difficult, that I've found, especially also being a woman, being taken seriously in certain environments, especially when I'm in particular regions that may not have a high representation of women in those policymaking spaces. Being taken seriously is something that is also an issue that I have found in this line of work.
Thank you so much, guys. These were all absolutely insightful responses. So we're going to move on to the next question, which is, can you connect and relate to the people that you serve? If so, what connects you to them? And if not, how did you overcome that to better understand their needs? And Dr. Acosta, please, if you can get us started.
Sure. So I definitely think the short answer to that question would be empathy. And empathy is like a key word right now within many areas like of knowledge, etc., because it is kind of like put yourself into someone else's shoes and try to understand like their situation. Having that said, I think empathy is just not enough, like as a initial, let's say, conversation, because I think that people miss the connection that each type of relationship with the people that you serve or with the demographic that you're interested in, it's not enough to say like, oh, I understand, or oh, I know, I've heard the news, or oh, like I can see what's going on. It's not enough. It does take, like any other relationship, time, commitment, true understanding. And by understanding is, I mean, like grasp like the historic, trend and the historic like suffering or interests or needs that people have. And then after you can have those types of experiences, then you can work with them in order to create let's say an intervention or a program or whatever you want to serve. Like in my case, it would be like getting closer to a certain population in order to understand better their healthcare needs and to be like have better healthcare outcomes through interventions, consultations, etc. So I think that people like say that because I have an MD or a PhD or went to grad school or went to university, etc., you have the right or the entitlement to have X or Y behavior towards the demographic that you serve. And people miss the fact that like sometimes there is definitely a difference in translation between what you know and what people actually need. Like not everything that you learn in school is actually applicable to everyone. So I definitely think that the long answer that I gave is a little bit more closer to maybe how can you put yourself into someone else's shoes, and then that includes like all the processes that I was talking about. So yeah, I think that kind of like sums it up, I guess, a little bit, but I don't know if someone else would like to jump in.
I definitely agree with that. And I think if I could add another word, would be humility. One thing that I realized is, and I keep telling myself, is that like ultimately I will not know fully like fully understand the narratives of the people that I intend to serve. And sometimes the best thing that I can do as a person is to sit down and listen, or to create space. Because if I'm not the best person to be sitting at that table for that particular conversation, I will try my best to create space to bring someone in that knows. Because at the end of the day, I can't speak on behalf of the experiences of the people that I'm intending to serve. But it is something that I'm passionate about. So I know like that is the most effective way. I simply like don't have the right to. And so that's just another thing is humility is that second term.
And yeah, I think that's really important. And another word to add, I'd say diversity. And what you were saying is that you would bring someone in if you didn't know, because again, you can't relate to everyone. Like I come from a different background than everyone else here. And so again, like for my team, like I run the Illinois chapter of Balance Boxes, and I have people like living in the Bronx, and I have no idea like what's going on in their area and what they need. And I know our first international chapter was India. And again, like I'm providing like educational activities. They're providing mass and food because that's what they need in their country. And I think in order to like make a team work, you need diversity, because I mean, I'd like to say I can relate to all my recipients, but I personally cannot, because they grew up in a completely different environment than I did. So the best that I can do is bring in diversity. And again, I live in the suburbs. I don't live in Chicago, and most of the recipients are from Chicago. So I've again like publicized and be like, hey, anyone living in Chicago, I'd like to invite you to the team. And again, like people are like, it's a good idea, and they're like, I'd love to help. So I think just like diversity and inclusion is an important thing, like being able to connect, because I cannot connect to every single person, because again, I come from a completely different background. So just, I think every team in order to be successful needs diverse viewpoints and again, a diverse team.
Yeah, and I'll just echo, what everyone said, but I think, I pretty much every day am the patients that I work with, I'm a white, privileged, educated woman at this point who's been able to kind of make her way around, and the people that I'm working with have absolutely nothing in common with me in terms of background or training or what have you. But in terms of values around health and well-being and empathy and culture, I think that goes across various domains. And I think also, again, that the emphasis on empathy, creating a space, and sort of what I said before, really asking questions and being curious. And that lets other people know who you may not feel like you relate to, think that they feel them, it makes them feel good. They want to be heard, or they're allowed that space to be heard, even if they don't feel comfortable emoting or sharing. So I think it's really, really valuable, again, to offer an opportunity for communication and listening, not just hearing, but listening. So.
I just wanted to end just because I just, with everything that like everyone was saying, I think that when you serve a certain demographic, it's not for you to, I mean, I think your goal is never like see yourself reflected in that. Like, of course you help, but I think, for example, for Ms. Callian, is you want to see your pediatric patients like grow and have an education and unlock their full potential. In my case, is like seeing Indigenous people or LGBTQ plus people having access to better healthcare, so that they can be successful. And I think that is the key message, in when you try to serve others. It's not for you to get better yourself. Like, yes, of course you'll learn and you'll grow, etc. But in the end, the true outcome and the true success of that help and of that service is the true success of others, and that is equity. And I think that's kind of like where it hits, that all your work is done so that we can have a better society and help each other out.
Really quick, I was just going to interrupt. I'm happy to let the conversation continue, but I know, Ms. Callan, I know you said you had to leave. So I did just want to let you go. So yeah, it was great to have you. It was great. All of your responses were so insightful.
Yes, thank you so much. And I apologize if anyone has any questions or wants any follow-up conversation, please feel free through the panel to link up with me. I'm here in San Francisco, West Coast, but always reachable via email or phone. Hope you all are well and stay healthy. And thank you so much.
Thanks to you.
Great to have you.
Bye.
Okay, we can continue comments on the previous question if anyone else has something to add.
I actually really liked Charlie's comment on working so we have a better society. I think the term serve implies a power dynamic that might not necessarily be there or should be there. And I think whenever I work, one thing that the best thing that someone ever told me was you're not helping anybody, Rachel. You're working alongside and you're partnering with. For me, the best way that I've been able to navigate maybe working with populations that I don't know direct narratives of or haven't lived experienced of is listening and then just understanding that the power dynamic, if anything, I know less. I always know less. I'm never going to know. So for me, the best thing that I can do is just listen. And then if I can bring a technical expertise, then I can bring a technical expertise. But at the end of the day, my ability to create a design for a population that I might not be as familiar with is going to be very limited. And so understanding that for me and them to work together, it has to be alongside. That's the maximum acceptable answer. So I just wanted to add that.
Great. We can move on to the next question then, which is historically, I think this is kind of a known fact, but due to social and political inequity, women, non-binary, and LGBTQ+ people have had less access and involvement in innovation and healthcare. And so as part of one or more of these groups, what has been your biggest challenge or limitation so far in providing a service? And so this is, I think, more about your personal journey as opposed to something that occurs within your field. And for this one, we can have Rachel answer first.
Great. So I guess I'm not really in the healthcare field. Wait, so is this, I want a clarification, sorry. Am I talking about my field that I'm interested in or just I'm just talking about my own experience in this particular area?
Yep, just your own experience of on your journey through innovation.
Oh, okay, great. So no one in my family is an engineer. And so when I told my parents I wanted to be an engineer, I was just good at math and science. That's just what I did. But I didn't really have somebody to kind of look at. And I actually didn't have my first woman professor until my junior year. And so for me, finding other women who also were just engineers was one step. And then another step was finding a woman who was interested in what I was interested in. And I found that my senior year of college. And so I didn't really understand how good it felt to see somebody that you could relate to in a field and in a position that you wanted to be in one day. And so I guess that is probably one of my greatest experiences is finding people who had similar interests that I could look up to. And I mean, I think that's not to say that having, I've had both of my PhD advisors, for example, are men, they're great, but at the same time, finding people who push barriers and bounds in your area is always really exciting and inspiring. I will say, I guess my biggest limitation has been being taken seriously, especially when I'm not based or I'm based in an area where there are a lot less women in the room. And so especially since I am I'm like the youngest person in the room, and I'm also a woman. And so I usually have a very hyper, very like fidgety, bubbly, go get like energy. I just have a lot of energy, and sometimes I have to remind myself to pull it in, like rein it in, and kind of understand that, like, you know, that's not necessarily the dynamic that is going to help me be taken seriously. And so it's something that I'd say is probably my biggest limitation right now.
And so just to add on, like being a woman, I think that, you know, there is some kind of like inequity. And it's not really like, again, you said you had a teacher junior year. Like me, like in class, like I'm in high school, so I haven't encountered that. But like I've noticed in predominantly like male dominated classes, like I feel kind of out of place. I remember in sixth grade, there were three other girls in my math class. And again, I felt discouraged to continue on that track because, again, I feel that women need to support each other. Like there should never be competition. I don't know why men try to make a competition out of math, but that was my experience. And I think, again, like I was saying, like inclusion, having a safe space, like I didn't know I wanted to go into engineering until I learned how to code. And it was my parents who actually pushed me because my dad is an engineer. So I did have an engineer in the family to encourage me to like pursue a degree. Again, like I'm in high school, so I'm going to, but I just feel that like being a woman, like you're not like given like access to it. I mean, like I am, like I can choose that, but it's like daunting. Like I don't necessarily want to go into a class where I know that there's one other girl, but again, it's like persevering. And I feel like, you know, like I don't feel that men have the same experience. And I'm taking AP physics this year, and there's only one other girl in the class. And again, it's not an easy class. And it's scary because the only person I feel comfortable reaching out to is the one other girl. And, you know, there's like groups and we're never put in a group. And I'm just like, oh, like I can't do this. But again, like perseverance. And I think it's just like about like creating a safe space is a way to tackle it. Again, like more like girl oriented clubs, like for again STEM, because I know that's what they're stressing, girls in STEM. But again, like other fields, I think that we need to have safer spaces.
Echoing everything that has been said, sorry. I think that to me there have been like two factors. I guess one external that is about representation and seeing people like you take those leadership positions. Like in the Fortune 500, like most like largest companies, there is less than 10% LGBTQ plus CEOs. You see kind of like more LGBTQ plus representation right now in media, but that doesn't mean that every LGBTQ plus person is wanting, you know, a media like career or whatever. And like I think very much like Rachel said, there's a lot of us that feel that this lack of representation equals to not being able to achieve something, and you even doubt yourself because it's like, why would I be there in the first place, right? If no one else is there. And that is something that happened to me. Like in my first year of medical school, I had a teacher who explicitly said to me that I would never get to be a doctor because of my background, because I was from the community, and it's just like not seen in the hospital, like third gender / non-binary people. And it was just kind of like a social belief. So yes, definitely that there's like a very strong, I think, like factor that tears you down and puts you in a lot of like a position of doubt, and that comes with yeah, like having less confidence in yourself and the ability of that you have in order to achieve whatever you want. So I think that's kind of like the first part. The second part is, I guess, a little bit of a self limitation that we give ourselves coming from social minorities, and it is a little bit about how I am not able to learn things as other people are learning because I have to deal with so many other factors at the same time. So for me to go to college is not like a free ride. Like I need to also deal with what type of discrimination am I going to face and how am I going to tackle it? What type of topics am I being taught that I think should not be taught or should be taught in a different way, and how to navigate that is also a challenge on its own, that creates like a path that is way more difficult that for the normal person that just like arrives there and say like, okay, I'm going to take it all. You cannot take it all when you're from a social minority, because everything that you're receiving comes with a negative or positive charge. Like it comes with something that either you say like, okay, I know what you're talking about, but I don't know how to apply it, because like I cannot do that in my community, or can I do that with my reality? And I cannot, or some other things that you would say like, okay, this is cool, but I think we need to learn it differently in order for me to be able to use it, and for it to become useful. So I think that those are kind of like two sides of the coin that people within social minorities need to think about, like when they face basically life. And I think that is a huge challenge, but I think that at the same time, there's now more resources than ever in order to confront that. And yeah, I think like looking to your community and see how strong it is and how resilient it has been over the years definitely helps you out, like deal with those challenges.
Thank you so much, you guys. Thank you for your answers and for this incredible advice. So the next question would be, during this current pandemic, the world of service has changed. How has the pandemic affected your work, whether it was starting during COVID or before? And what practical advice would you give someone who wants to make a change during this pandemic? And Rachel, could you please get us started?
Sure. So for me, I got started, I basically had to put a lot of my projects kind of on hold or reroute them through a different channel that I had anticipated that would happen this summer. But I think the biggest thing I've done during this time is I worked with the National Academy of Engineering on starting a virtual incubator that specializes in response for COVID along different routes. So it's, there's healthcare and medicine, security, economic and social recovery, and then like mental health and wellness. And so housing innovation spaces under the umbrella of the National Academy of Engineering, and just being able to create and build and design this entire incubator from the ground up was probably the best, or I guess the biggest thing that took up my mental space during the pandemic, which is still ongoing. And so I guess my biggest advice, I also worked alongside EWB on figuring out how can we source the EWB community to serve, problems that we have with COVID-19. So I guess the practical advice I would give someone who wants to make a change during the pandemic is to just like take a leap. For me, I never anticipated that I would find myself. I just kind of followed a trail of breadcrumbs, which is, I guess, the second piece of advice, is that I found like most of my career, and also just I think this is also like a research thing, it's just that like, it's a trail of breadcrumbs. It's a one step at a time kind of process. But if you find something that interests you, I encourage you to follow it and to not question yourself in doing so, because if you have this opportunity, or if you're given an opportunity that really excites you and that you're passionate about, it's okay to doubt yourself, but know that you can. And I think that's probably my biggest trail of advice, or my biggest piece of advice in this pandemic.
So for me, I think COVID has, the gaps and the necessities that minorities have felt historically, like, are still there. I think COVID, what the pandemic has done is kind of like highlight them more and make them more evident, because when there is kind of like these massive events where everyone needs something at the same time, you see more clearly like who gets that and who doesn't, and who is right now at the hospital and who is not. And that is just like a great, I think, unfortunately, like it happened this way, but I guess in many ways, like some governments and politicians have taken notice of this, and I think people are a little bit more conscientious about everything. That does not mean that all of our problems are fixed and that everything will be perfect. Absolutely not. But it does help start a conversation and bring attention to the issues that is needed. So I think it has been, and especially 2020, you know, with Black Lives Matter, with COVID-19, elections being how it is, like it has been a Tuesday every single day until yesterday. I mean, all of these kinds of events that have happened this year, I think, have realized that human beings need to address certain things in order to just be able to have a sustainable society. And I think that's the key point. Like sustainability is something that right now everyone is talking about, because basically the status quo is not relevant. It's not helpful. It's just pointless anymore right now. Sorry. And so I think that, like, okay, so now getting into the advice, if you want to change something, or if you want to truly see a different result, like during a time such as the pandemic, is helping yourself, like grab that momentum, grab those stories, grab that evidence, because what we're seeing now, it's the crude truth of who is getting in, who is getting out, the reasons for that, where is the gap. And this moment, like, takes how do I say it? Like it's such precious, you know, it's so precious, because we need to help other people see that, and that is a huge challenge in itself. And if you're young, like, I don't know if you're like under 30 or over 30 or whatever, you do need to kind of like know how to take that information and translate it to the people that are not there and cannot see and cannot show those kinds of yeah, or cannot ask for help. And I think, yeah, I think that would be the advice. Like, take this opportunity to provide that evidence. And
Yeah, so my thing, balance box, which I've said, I actually started during the pandemic, so I haven't really like noticed like non-pandemic like how we're gonna function. But basically, like again, like all the minorities, like the issues that they're facing, again, people who aren't as privileged, like they're highlighted, the problems. And that's kind of when I noticed it. And I mean, it's always been present in my community, but I like again, like I took a leap of faith. I talk to my friend. I was like, let's do something. And then a piece of advice, I'd be like, go for it. And I remember like just like when I was younger, I felt like I couldn't do anything. Like there's problems, like there's always problems, there always will be problems. And I felt that like, you know, I can't do anything. I'm so young. And like age is just a number. It does not matter how old, young, like where you come from, like you can make an impact. And I wish someone told me this when I was younger. Like my freshman Sydney would be like I can't do anything, like it's up to the seniors. And I am a senior now, but I started this when I was a junior, and my friend, she was a sophomore, and you can do anything, and there are no boundaries. And I'd say follow your passions, because if you don't, like you'd never know. And I've had other ideas and I haven't really done anything with them. And I'm not one to give up, but you know, like when times get tough, like COVID, you got to persevere, you got to keep going. And it does not matter who you are, where you come from, like you can do it, and just follow your passions.
Okay, great. So now we can move on to some of the other like post Q&A questions, which are from the chat. And so the first one from this is, and for these we won't give like anyone who can start, anyone can just pick up. But the first question from this is, where do you envision your field going in the future as COVID continues or starts to die down in the future, assuming that's going to happen? And will you continue, you know, whatever COVID related projects you're doing right now, or shift them into something else? Kind of where do you see that going?
I can say something.
Go ahead.
Okay. So again, like I run the Illinois branch, and I think balance boxes is in about like 20 states. Like again, some states are just starting, But I hope this continues post-pandemic because again, like just because this started during the pandemic, because we noticed a problem that there is a lack of education, and I hope it continues. And again, like this is a problem that won't go away if we don't do anything. So the person who I run it with, she is a junior now, and her brother is younger and he's part of the team, and we're looking for kids who are has the same like passion as us, who want to give back to their community. And so I envision this hopefully like one like up to like I don't know what a big charity is. I can't come up like with one at the moment, but hopefully it will grow and hopefully it will expand and people will catch on and realize that this is a problem and that they can do something about it. And I mean, it's not going to be like the Salvation Army. Like everyone knows about that. Like you can just like give clothes, it's easy. But for my charity, you only have to like give books, games, like food that, you know, if you don't like you can just go to the grocery store and drop off cans. So it's really easy. And that's why I feel like it's going to grow in the future. And that's why I have really high hopes for it. And hopefully post COVID, it will succeed.
Oh, no, go ahead. Or, okay, I'll go on. So for me, I think, so I work with disaster. I work with earthquakes and landslides. And I think the brutal truth is that it's only going to get worse before it gets any better. And right now, I guess we're kind of just in a race to keep the ball from rolling completely down the hill. And so I really don't see that part of my field changing. If it will hopefully gain more attention, just because there's on a global scale not as much coordination done between different populations, like even in the US, different regions in coordinating efforts for disaster relief. And so hopefully that will become a more common topic of conversation. And so that is kind of how I expect that happening. As for my work with the NAE, I would hope that we could turn it into a more general disaster incubator. Not that COVID is by any means gone, it is alive and very much present in all of our lives. But the hope is that we would begin to possibly expand into other areas of interest and other areas that desperately basically the goal is to elevate and provide resources for innovators who are interested in specific areas and make it as accessible to all populations as possible. And that would be the goal.
So I think, well, medicine won't die because of COVID. I think as long as we have diseases, medicine will exist. But I do think, and I hope, that medicine changes its focus on healthcare and realize that healthcare is way more than just prescribing drugs or just, right? And that there's like definitely many determinants that will kind of like promote outcomes to go one way or another. And I think that is growing in medicine right now, but I think COVID will definitely give it a little bit more of a boost.
Great. So our next question is specific to Dr. Acosta. So it's about what you mentioned earlier about specific topics that you think should either be taught or not taught, or maybe taught a little bit differently in your like history of being a student. Could you elaborate more on those? Maybe how you think that should change and like what it could do to affect you better?
Sure. So I think one of the best examples, well, I'm going to refer specifically to medical education, but I guess that you can also like apply it to many other different things. And if you think critically about like even in your high school, like the topics that you're being taught or the examples that you're being given, you can also think about this. But for example, when I was a second year medical student, I had OBGYN classes, like obstetrics and gynecology, and we never, ever, ever saw within class like what happens. For example, we were talking about contraception, right, and accessibility to STI testing, such as the pap smears for HPV, so on and so forth. But we never discussed in class or with our professors, like what happens when you have a lesbian couple and you're giving like sexual and reproductive counseling for this couple, like what can I recommend? Should I still recommend contraceptives? Should I still, for example, the methodology of like using condoms or using X or Y contraceptives, is it still the same like when you do it like for a straight woman or for a woman who's not? And what about trans women? Like, is it still like that have, for example, also vaginas but not the same reproductive system? So what does that change there? And I think it's just thinking about the same things. It's not like it's not like the skin changes or bones are different. They're absolutely not. It's just the way you approach these topics, and that you needed just a little bit to take them with a little bit of grain of salt and think critically. Am I able to apply all the knowledge that I'm giving here? Like, is this directly applicable to what I have? And it doesn't need to be like far from medicine. I can give you another example. When I was in high school though, like for example, we were seeing statistics, right? And regressions and so on and so forth. And like one of the examples in probability class was like, what is the probability that a guy would date a Playboy bunny or not? And like, okay, I guess if you want to be like realistic, whatever, like the example could fit in. Yes, I mean, it's mathematics. Like you can put like apples and bananas or whatever. But why are we seeing this specific example? Is this like a social message? Like did the professor needed to do that example specifically? Could he have picked other types of things to compare? So that's what I'm saying. Like, is like, how are we translating knowledge into our actual, like applications in life? And so those are kind of like just two examples that I can come up, but there are many, and I'm free to discuss with anyone if you would like more.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Acosta. So the next question goes to every panelist. What advice do you have for building a community of people like you? And or do you have any sort of recommendations? Anyone can answer.
I'm just thinking. So advice, like when I think like community, are we talking about friends or?
Yeah, it could be anything like a club or camp.
Okay, like a club. Okay. Well, again, like every club, it has a direction, and I'll talk about a club I'm in. I'm actually in Girl Up, if you know what that is. It's part of the UN Foundation. It's like basically girls being like advocates for, again, women's rights and the LGBTQA community. So when I think about building a community, I think about like being proactive, I'd say. Like, again, you can have friends, you can giggle, and that's fun and all. But when I think of club, like I want like a mission. And I know one of the years we went to a women's homeless shelter. And I think there's like a lot of pieces into that. We cooked them food, we dropped off sanitary pads for them, and we actually got to hear from them, which is really cool. But I think of like, when I think of a community, I think like being proactive and doing something to better the overall community. So I would think like there's communities within communities, if that makes sense. And again, I would just like try to have a direction, because again, like if you have a direction in mind, like you're more willing to succeed. Because if I just say, okay, let's help women's rights, where do I start is the question. So I think like, again, having a direction and trying to like think positively and believing in yourself, and again, being proactive.
I think for me, the best advice that I could provide is that the best communities that I found myself in are ones where I learn from. I think the most dangerous thing that we can find ourselves in is an echo chamber. And so that comes down to a few things. Building community is great. And building organizations, building something that you're passionate about is a wonderful feeling. And pursuing things that you're passionate about too. So be ambitious, be daring, think big, but also recognize that like, it's important to recognize that our perspective that we may have as individuals is not universal, right? It's an individual perspective. And so something that like I definitely recommend is take your perspective with a grain of salt as well. Everyone else has equally as important understanding of the world, and to create a really good and healthy community, valuing every perspective equally is going to be really important. And valuing different perspectives. Life, there's this like great quote, I don't know who it's by, but it's basically saying like life begins at the end of your comfort zone. And living life according to that, you will find really great people who also think that way. Your energies will attract other energies. I think that's like a great way to find community and foster it. And then the third thing is to take care of yourself. I think we live in a world where we're like, especially with like just capitalism, we live in a society that just, you know, we have to push and push and push and evolve and achieve. And I think, oh, thank you. I see in the Q&A, someone found the author of the quote. Thank you. But I think seldom do we really value just taking a step back, because that's equally as productive as doing the work. In fact, honestly, one cannot happen without the other. And so taking care of your body and your mind, and just kind of like your soul, like what sits well with you. I think we don't value that enough as like the core aspect of like us being able to do anything at all. So I guess that's my advice.
So I just think like in the interest of time, I might be just kind of like really quick. So I think that previously we said that kind of like humility is just like a huge important factor, but I think that if you want to really like build a community, like besides doing that internal work of being humble and knowing your place and knowing what you can do, etc., it's also about truly seeing outcomes, right? And being like really outcome driven, that the work that you do within that community shows some sort of impact, and that impact really reflects the needs that that community has. So yeah, I definitely think that building a community like requires that everyone works as a team in a community, and the outcomes that you have as a result of that work is something that everyone can look at and be proud at. And I think that was what nurtures kind of like everyone feeling part of that community.
Great, thank you. So actually our next question is kind of our last like concluding remarks. And it's just in general, you know, do you have any final thoughts you would want to impart, or even something that's related to your field, like a question that you think we should keep in mind, something that you, just like a general thing that you think people should continue to think about? Any sort of like concluding remarks before we end the panel?
Sure. I think you can start then. From today, I think that the key messages, I guess, is that many times you don't know what everyone else is thinking or feeling or going through. And although you can try like to expand your knowledge and get to know everything, there's still that 110% that it is truly meaningful and that it will remain a mystery, and that is okay. Like I think that when you have peace of mind in knowing that it is okay not to know everything, and that it is okay to not have every single answer, you can open up yourself to that answer being fulfilled by someone else. And that is the magic of collaborating and building a community. So yeah, I invite you to like explore that option of having different perspectives and different answers feed your life. And I think that will make you like, I don't know if a better person, I don't know like if a better professional, but at least it gives you like food of thought. I think it's how you say it in English. Like it helps you think differently, and I think that you grow by doing that.
And something I'd say to the audience, you can't predict the future. You don't know what's going to happen, and life is full of possibilities. So I love this Disney quote. They go, "Dream big, princess." I know, like, oh, you've probably heard that, but yeah, just like dream big, put your mind to it. And I like, again, like a goal, like, and it, like, let's say a dream, like, like starting and imagining your dream, like you're halfway there. And then all you got to do is you got to persist, and you got to keep trying. And again, like all my, like everything I'm interested to, like it started with a thought, and then it was like all the time and effort I put into it. So again, like if you love something, like go for it, put in time, put in effort. And again, like I have like crazy thoughts, like, oh my God, I want to end world hunger. Like this is what I want to go into engineering. Hopefully like I'll be productive with that and solve a global problem. But again, like me saying this doesn't like translate to that. Like it's putting in the time and effort to get from point A to point B. So again, just like keep trying, keep persisting, and you're almost there.
I guess my little bit of advice, or I guess my last comments are that no matter where you are in your life, whether you're 19, 20, 30, 40, 50, your ego will be both like your greatest benefactor and your like demise. So you have to believe in yourself, but you can't think that you're the only person in the room who knows. And honestly, the best things in life are often come when we put our egos aside and just work, and just, listen. Doing things where choosing not to be defensive is probably the greatest thing, and listening to people who know more than us and who know more about a specific area or perspective. That is the most valuable thing that we can do. And so, yeah, I would say just watch your ego. It's dangerous.
Thank you so much. That concludes our discussion for today. I'm like banging the gavel. Yeah, I think that's all. Thank you guys. Thank the panelists so much for all of your guys' incredible insight, and for the life force that you guys have dedicated and are continuing to give to your work.
Yeah, and just to remind everyone, oh, sorry. Just to remind everyone, there's going to be a final email sent out on November 14th. So hang tight for that. It's going to contain resources as well as the contact information of our panelists if you want to follow up after the panel. And just as a reminder, we don't host these panels for conversation to end here. We want to arm you all with techniques and equipment and ideas to carry this conversation back into your own communities and social circles. So I encourage you guys all to do that because you're all more than capable of. And yeah, again, thank you so much to our panelists for taking the time to do this. We really, really do appreciate you all speaking here today. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
You too. Bye. Thanks, everyone.
All right.